The fuck going on with y'all, man, and welcome to the best Necromancer leveling guide for Diablo 4. This is currently my level 50 Necromancer in World Tier 2 doing the Capstone dungeon in order to reach World Tier 3. The build focuses on dealing damage through minions and dot, or damage over time. It also has some nice defensive layers with barrier and fortify. In this guide, we're going to talk about skills and what to get per level, Renown and the Book of the Dead mechanic exclusive to the Necromancer, gear and what stats to look for, the Codex of Power and the legendary aspect used for the build, how to level from levels 1 to 50 with a step-by-step process, and a few tips and tricks to help with your Diablo 4 experience. All in all, I had a pretty easy time leveling with a Necromancer. And with that being said, let's get into the guide. Skills. Here's how I would spend my skill points leveling as a Necromancer. By default, Necromancers start off with Raised Skeleton. Use this ability on corpses to spawn your minions, and generally you want to always have your max number of minions summoned. They don't do much early game, but later on, once you get a few passives and legendary aspects, they get pretty nasty. The basic skill we use is Reap. This ability doesn't really do much damage at all. Its main role is to spawn corpses every time you hit an enemy, which helps a lot considering we are a minion build. The core skill that we use is none other than Blight. Blight deals heavy damage on both the initial hit and the dot damage immediately after. It also slows and provides a nice damage buff for us and our minions when an enemy is inside the Blight pool. This is one of our main damage dealers, so if you have the essence, which is the Necromancer resource, use it. Another big damage dealer of the build is our next skill, Corpse Explosion. We take the Blighted passive for this ability to turn it into shadow damage, aligning with our core skill, Blight, which makes stats like damage over time on gear insanely good for this build. In the early game, you'll struggle finding corpses to explode, but later on, it'll be much easier for us to do that. The next corpse skill we take is Corpse Tendrils. This is our CC, our crowd control ability. It slows every enemy in range at first, and then stuns them for 3 seconds. Also, the Plagued passive allows this skill to apply Vulnerable, which is one of the best damage stats in the game. And finally, the last skill that we use, our ultimate, Army of the Dead. Funny enough, it's not actually used for damage. I mean, yes, it does deal some sort of damage, but I found myself using it to either make more corpses or summon more of my skeleton army. The last thing I want to mention in the skills portion of this guide is our key passive, Shadow Blight. It basically stacks on top of all the other Shadow Blight damage that we're already dealing in this build, so it's a no-brainer. And there you have it. This is the skill tree that I would recommend getting for this type of build. And now, let's move on to the next part of the guide. Renown and the Book of the Dead. As you're playing Diablo 4, you'll notice that you get Renown. If you get Renown 3 on all regions, then you are given 10 extra skill points. Here's how I would spend them. Get some minion buffs, damage increase, and add a defensive layer, Fortify. Boom. More importantly, let's talk about the exclusive Necromancer mechanic, the Book of the Dead. It's pretty simple. This book provides upgrades for our summons, and the upgrades we take will synergize with this build. For our skeletal warriors, we turn them into reapers and choose the second upgrade, giving them a chance to spawn a corpse every time they hit an enemy. For our mages, we give them the power of shadow and also choose the second upgrade for them, letting them fire off additional shadow bolt attacks. Unfortunately, for our next Book of the Dead choice, we must sacrifice our bone golem. Trust me, the idea of a hulking creature walking next to me beating the shit out of mobs sounds cool, but sacrificing the bone golem gives 10% attack speed. That's just too hard to pass up. Now that we talked about the skills, Renown, and the Book of the Dead, let's move on to the next part of the guide. Gear. Now to be fair, the gear you obtain during the leveling process doesn't really matter. If the items you find have a higher item level and have more green stats than red, then you would just normally put it on. The reason for this is because the gear you get from World Tier 3 and beyond is massively better and will instantly replace whatever you're wearing. But if you're a person like me who does care about stats even while leveling, here's what I would recommend. For our weapon, we want to use two-handed swords. they have high base DPS, and have a critical strike damage implicit. There are plenty of stats that'd be good on a weapon for this build, but for now I'll just focus on DPS and damage over time. If your weapon has sockets, go ahead and throw in amethyst jewels for even more damage. And also, feel free to upgrade your weapon at the blacksmith a couple times as well, because it is cheap and will help with the leveling process. For armor, there are a lot of helpful stats, but there are a few that are more important than others. Crowd control duration on our helm helps us deal more damage and take less damage. Life on body armor gives us a nice defensive boost. Blight ranks on gloves make our core skill even more of a threat. Corpse explosion ranks on pants give our secondary damage more oomph. And movement speed on our boots are definitely needed considering how sluggish this build will feel at times. For sockets on armor, we use ruby for even more life. On jewelry, like most builds, we want to focus on offensive stats. On the amulet, you want to look for more corpse explosion ranks. More boom boom is good. And on rings, just look for any damage modifier. For sockets, use skulls for more armor. Now that we've covered the gear and what stats to look for in this build, let's move on to the next part of the guide. The Codex of Power. The Codex of Power is a place where you can imprint and extract legendary aspects. Legendary aspects can be obtained through either completing dungeons or finding them on gear. The legendary aspect that we use for this build is the Blighted Offensive aspect. It's basically another huge damage modifier. It can be obtained by completing the Akan's Grasps dungeon in the Hawazar region, and once you've completed the dungeon and had the legendary aspect in your Codex of Power, go ahead and imprint it on this legendary amulet, Vigo's Protecting Amulet. You can get this amulet at the end of Act 1 in the campaign. Some other legendary aspects to look for on gear are +2 to your skeleton warriors and +2 to your skeleton mages. The more minions, the better. Alright, now that we've gone over the skills, the gear, and Codex of Power, let's move on to the next part of the guide. How to level from 1 to 50. Now, before I say anything, I want to preface this by saying that there are multiple ways to level up in this game. You can do the campaign, you can do dungeons, you can even run around and just bash a bunch of white mobs all day. But the way that I'm going to show you is the way that I found the most efficient and the most fun. If this is your first character in Diablo 4, then this is what I would recommend you to do from level 1 to 50. From levels 1 to 30, just do the campaign. You may find yourself underleveled at some point, but the main story is pretty easy anyway for you to be just fine. However, if you feel uncomfortable with being underleveled, then feel free to do some side quests here and there. From levels 30 to 40, you are going to run around on your mount and get all the waypoints, do all the strongholds, and then touch all the altars of Lilith. I know, it may seem like a lot, but doing this will get you Renown 3 in all regions and make your current character, plus any other characters you make in the future, much stronger. Then from levels 40 to 50, you are going to do Tree of Whisper objectives, prioritizing dungeons. We prioritize dungeons because they give the most XP, and you can unlock useful legendary aspects that you might want to use later. If this isn't your first Diablo 4 character, and you already have Renown 3 in all regions, and have already gotten all the altars, then from levels 1 to 50, just do the Tree of Whispers. There are probably other leveling methods that are faster and more efficient than this, like spamming the same dungeon over and over again, but I tried that and didn't find it much fun. Plus, I think it's very important to unlock all the aspects eventually. Alright, now that we've talked about the leveling process, let's move on to the last part of the guide. Tips and tricks. What difficulty should you play Diablo 4 in? Well, during the leveling process, just stay in World Tier 1. World Tier 2 is just not worth it. The amount of extra XP and gold it gives is not worth the extra amount of time it takes to kill stuff. The only time you'll do something in World Tier 2 is the capstone dungeon needed to unlock World Tier 3. To help you explore and find where things are exactly in the Diablo 4 world, use the interactive map. I linked it down below. The interactive map tells you where everything is. This includes waypoints, dungeons, altars, and much more. Next, level up your potion. Once you reach certain levels, your health potion icon will have an up arrow on it, indicating that it's time to upgrade. Make sure you do this at your nearest alchemist. And to piggyback on this, also make sure you're picking up all the materials that you run into in the open world. Speaking of materials, use gold and materials wisely. The only times you should be using any types of gold and materials is upgrading your weapon and amulet no more than 3 times, and imprinting the blight aspect on your amulet. Other than that, salvage all your gear you find and save your gold as much as possible. Trust me, you're going to need it in the future. Let's talk about combos. Here is the most common Necromancer combo that I would use to fight an elite or a boss. I would start off with using Army of the Dead to make sure you have max skeletal warriors and max mages. Attack with Reap to spawn a corpse. Use corpse tendrils on the corpse to apply CC and vulnerable. Then use Blight and Corpse Explosion to apply your dot damage. Then proceed to spam Blight until you're out of essence, and then proceed to spam with Corpse Explosion. And there you have it, y'all. The best Necromancer leveling guide from 1 to 50. If you've enjoyed this video and or found it helpful, then I'm glad. I plan to make a leveling guide for all the classes in Diablo 4 with Rogue, Sorcerer, and now Necromancer completed. I also plan to do a best endgame build for each class, so if you're interested in anything Diablo 4, throw me a sub, won't you? Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And remember to stay a while and listen. Peace out.